All right, everybody, welcome back to the Preacher Boys podcast. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Eric. I'm super excited about it. I've been a fan of the podcast for a while, so excited to connect and to be on. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, excited to have you on. And I was telling you a little bit beforehand, like I've been watching you on TikTok, like a lot of people obviously are doing, and meaning to connect. And man, with the three podcasts I'm involved with, trying to connect with people is always hard. But I figured what better way to intro myself than let's just hop on and record the conversation.
In the last year, I have made so many friends, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's my buddy, that's my friend, whatever. And it's like most of our conversations are like live in front of people, that kind of thing. Right. So it's been a lot of fun for sure.
And now most of my friends, I don't even want to use quotes because like they're legitimate friends, like I've never met, like they're just people that I've connected with, And then the weirdest for me, and this is probably how you feel with someone who is watching on TikTok or but I'll have people who I'll meet who listen to the show, and I'll realize like midway through the conversation, like holy crap, they know everything about me, like they know 200 hours of just me yapping, which makes me feel really bad for them. But yeah, I mean, I was drawn to you. Like I talk a lot, like there's a lot of bad pastors out there that, say a lot of really dumb things. I wouldn't have a show if it wasn't for that. And I always say, I wish there was more good pastors that were louder and called out some of the crap that happens in churches and in general, just in society, in the world. And so your content is a breath of fresh air. Tell me a little bit. I mean, I don't know anything about you past, TikTok. And I know you weren't like born and then started a TikTok account. So take me a little bit back into your background. Like, how did you get into ministry, into church? Like, what's your kind of experience with the church?
So, I was, what's the the church kid joke? I was a drug baby, right? Like I was I was drugged to church from the time I was, in my mother's womb or whatever, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night kind of deal. And so, grew up in the Southern Baptist church. But it was very traditional, kind of fundamental, not an IFB church, but definitely had some of those same like kind of mentalities and theologies that ran through it. And so I grew up in that culture. And then I was fortunate enough that I got the opportunity to go to a pretty diverse middle school and high school. Okay. And so I started getting like a really good perspective outside of my own bubble, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So fortunately I was in that culture, but kind of in that very traditional fundamentalist Baptist culture. But I didn't, have to go to like, I wasn't homeschooled or didn't have to go to like an IFB, school that's connected to the church. So fortunately I dodged all that. And I went to public school, and I started to just get this really diverse friend group. And I started to kind of see things from so many different perspectives. Like I tell people all the time, I remember having a conversation in 7th grade, and this was like 2001 or 2. Right. And I remember sitting down with a friend of mine at lunch, and we were talking about something with, something had happened in his apartment complex. And I'm like, well, why didn't you just call the police? He goes, well, I don't trust the police. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, because I was always raised like, these are our heroes. Like they're heroes with no capes kind of thing. And he goes, man, we've got a completely different view of what the police do and don't do. And it was just a really eye-opening conversation for me to hear something from so outside of my perspective. And so I kind of fell in love with that a little bit. But, fast forward, I ended up going to a little bit more, it was kind of a mega church in this area, several thousand members, still an SBC church. And so my family moved to that church when I was in high school. And then I ended up going to Oklahoma Baptist University, to major in student ministry and pastoral studies. And so, and just through that process, I just remember having a ton of questions about the things that were being taught in those settings and the things that were being taught in the church. And that just kind of led me down that road of to start really questioning some of that stuff, and eventually what led me out of the Baptist church.
Right. Well, I mean, I want to rewind a little bit, because you talk about, growing up with a diverse group of people, and you think that's a really good thing. And that's not something like, we talk about the IFB on this show, but within the Southern Baptist Convention, within evangelicalism, there's this idea of separation, we are these people within IFB circles. It's literally a doctrine, we separate from, people who aren't believers. And, even now you're still a pastor, obviously still a believer, but you don't look at it as a downside to be spending time with people with different points of view or different perspectives. Why do you have that view on it? Like, why? Because a lot of people would say, like, oh, be around people that edify you or strengthen you in the faith or that sort of thing. Why do you have a different perspective or view on that?
I think there's beauty in diversity. I think God created us diverse intentionally. And so while, my 7-year-old put it best the other day, I find myself quoting her more and more often with this. She gets in the car and she goes, "Dad, you know, we all have 206 bones." And I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. Your mom's a nurse. She probably knows that. I don't. But that's real cool. And she goes, "I just think it's great how God makes us all the same on the inside and different on the outside, so that he can enjoy our beauty like flowers." And I was like, golly, I mean, just hit me with all of that knowledge. Like, it was heavy, but it's such a good point, right? There's joy in diversity. There's freedom in diversity. There's beauty in diversity. And so I think when we sit down to the table and we hear different perspectives and we hear about different cultures and different worldviews and different ideas, I think all of those things make us better as people. We learn how to respect each other better. And ultimately, I think at the end of the day, then we accomplish something that Jesus said was pretty important, which was, first off, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, but to love your neighbor as yourself. You can't love your neighbor unless you appreciate who they are. And so I think that there is a lot of beauty in diversity. And I think the problem with the American evangelical church, the American fundamentalist church, is that they have blocked out diversity because they're afraid of it. And that is unacceptable. That's not what God is. When we talk about the image of God, it is an image that is vast and complex and beautiful, that surrounds the globe and encompasses people from every culture, race, worldview. That is the beauty of who God is. And so I think that we need to normalize appreciating diversity. And I think that's one of the biggest problems in the church.
Where do you think that fear comes from?
Well, none of us like things that make us uncomfortable, right? Or none of us like things that don't look like us. Or, I mean, we move to friend groups that look like us and share our interests. Like we move to communities that look like us and share our interests. And because we're creatures of comfort. Like, this feels comfortable. These people feel comfortable, right? But comfort is complacency. Complacency is a rut, and a rut is nothing but a grave with the ends knocked out of it. Like, that's all it is. And so you're literally handicapping yourself. So while it's easy to land in this space where we all think the same, we all talk the same, we all look the same, we all sound the same, all of that sounds great or whatever. But the problem is there's no growth. There's no movement out of that. I mean, and we look at the life of Jesus and we see how he pushed back against the establishment. We see how he pushed back against the norm. We see how he called people not only at times metaphorically, but also literally out of their comfort zones, whether that be socially, whether that be racially, whether that be gender wise, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we see Jesus elevate people of different social statuses, people of different different genders, right? Like, we see Jesus equalize and edify women through his ministry. We see Jesus equalize and edify those that his culture said were, they were basically racist against, right? Like, you think about, you think about Jesus with the Samaritan woman. He just chops off so many stereotypes right off at the knees, just in that conversation alone, by approaching her and showing her value and saying, you have something that I want, and I value you enough to give me something. I'm willing to humble myself before you and ask you for a favor. So Jesus shows us through that servant leadership in that moment that diversity, inclusion, and growth are important. And so I think that people run to what they know because it's comfortable, but they're not doing anything other than handicapping themselves and making themselves look less like Jesus. And so, again, beauty and diversity, we see it in the ministry of Jesus, and therefore that's what we have to be about.
Yeah, you mentioned being part of a mega church culture in the area, and it really pushing you away from the sect of Christianity that you were in. What was it you saw there? Was it just the lack of diversity, or was it, some of the host of other problems that get often associated with, mega churches in general, or kind of that American evangelicalism?
So I think it was I think once I kind of stepped back and looked at it from 10,000 feet versus like in the middle of it, it's really easy to get into those places and just get caught up in the middle of it, right? Like you feel like you're being the hands and feet of Jesus. Like,
you're
we're
too
giving
busy.
Money. Yeah. You get overly busy, right? You become a cog in the system, right? Like so then you're valuable, right? So you feel that value. And as human creatures, like, we like value. So, and so you get into that system and you get washed into that system. But I was fortunate enough to have a moment where I could kind of step back for a second, especially after some conversations that I had again with some of my friends from school who had said, hey, I've had encounters with your church, and man, it just didn't feel very loving or whatever. And so I kind of stepped back from it. And what I came to realize is that a lot of those churches are pointing at themselves and saying, they're posting on their social media, they're talking from the pulpit, they're whatever, look at what we are doing and it always has the vibe of those people, right? Like, it's not like they want to help people in a situation. Like, I remember I started hearing language like, we're going to help, those homeless people, or we're going to help those people in poverty. And it's like, no, you're defining people by their situations. And that's not fair. They're still valuable people created in the image of God. This is someone who, and I've actively had to try to change my language in this. This is someone who is in a season of homelessness. This is someone who is in a season of poverty. They are not defined by those things. That's not who they are, because that's not who God sees them as. And so my problem is it had a ton of, it just stunk of, and later on, this phrase became more prevalent, later down the road. I don't know if I had an identifier for it then. What I would call it now is white privilege. Like, it just smelled of white privilege. Like it reeked of, oh, look at us, we're so wonderful. Look at us help those people, that kind of thing. But they were the gatekeepers. And I really, really struggled with that. And so that wasn't good community allyship. And so then I had the opportunity to start my first ministry job was at an inner city church here in Oklahoma City. And I just remember the incredible, not just diversity of that group, but just having a complete heart change for, I was the youth pastor. We had kids coming from, so it's like a small town in the middle of Oklahoma City. Like Oklahoma City completely surrounds it, but it's its own township. It's like 3/4 of a mile square. And at the time there were like 8 businesses in this town, and 6 of them were strip clubs. And so a lot of the moms there worked at the strip clubs, right? And I just remember seeing like the kids and the parents, these mothers, whatever. And I just remember, and I'm like, man, how sad is it that we act like these people, are less than, it's those people versus us, or whatever the case is. And it just really challenged my heart to the point where I just began to see, and I still have to continue to work at this, right? Because we all struggle with it. If you ever think you've arrived, you haven't. But I just remember starting to see humanity in things that I was told for so long that there was no humanity in.
Yeah.
And so it just completely changed my perspective, not just on the way I read the scriptures and the way that I saw the ministry of Jesus, because I had always been taught Jesus from white middle to upper class people. Like that's where I had always heard about Jesus from. But then having conversations about Jesus in so many diverse conversations outside of that, it began to just change my understanding of who Jesus was and what he was doing in his ministry. And it has definitely made me better, and it's challenged me to grow. And I hope that every day I can continue that growth.
From the people who are in those positions, usually teaching about Jesus, who, have the books and the platforms and the stages, and maybe even some who are listening right now, who would find themselves on demographic, when they hear you talk about things like your privilege or talk about having diverse conversations, they may be turned off and say, well, you're just following a more liberal, Christianity, or there's, you're using language that's associated with, the more progressive liberal Christian circles. What would you say to those people? And I think you may have said some of it already, but what would you say to people who hear those words and immediately go, oh, well, obviously he's following this progressive trend?
Go back to the scriptures. Go back to the scriptures. Go back and see how Jesus edified people. Go back and see how Jesus brought equality. Go back and see who Jesus condemned, like who he had his harshest words for. It wasn't the woman caught in adultery. It wasn't the woman at the well who had 5 husbands and was living with another man. It wasn't those people. He showed love and grace and compassion in those situations, right? He never had strong. Who did he have the strongest words for? The religious elite, the religious establishment. Those are the ones that Jesus called out and held to this rigorous standard of, at different times. I mean, literally just gives them, just cusses them up one side and down the other, right? Like, you brood of vipers, you whitewash tombs. And then, at another point, and this is actually one of my favorite points in scripture, when Jesus says, you're unmarked graves that people don't know they walked on. And we just kind of walk right by that passage. Like, we don't think about, we know that Jesus is being strong there, but we don't really know why. If you put that in cultural context, what Jesus is saying is so if you walked over into a grave site, or over into a tomb, or over a grave, in that culture, you were then considered unclean, right? You were dirty. You actually, they believe that you carry death with you, right? And so there was a ritual that you would have to go perform or be a part of to cleanse yourself. And what Jesus is saying here is, he's saying, you're a bunch of unmarked graves and you are dragging people through death, and they don't even know that they're dying. You're bringing death. And so what I would say is, I would say that, you can sit here and say all day long, oh, that sounds liberal. Oh, that sounds progressive. Oh, this sounds this or that. Jesus didn't fit in your political box. Jesus isn't a part of the American political system. That's not how it works. Jesus was somebody who came and showed us how to bring equality and justice and love and grace and compassion. And he also taught us how to push back against the establishment that was oppressing people. And so, I think that, what I would say to those folks is pretty simple. I would go back and I would open-minded read the Gospels. I would look at the life of Jesus, and I would see his gospel is not about America first. His gospel isn't about, making America great again. His gospel is about love and truth and salvation to everyone. And we need to treat everyone like they were created in the image of God, and that they are loved desperately by God. No strings attached.
How do so many people go into scripture and grow? I mean, sometimes 3rd generation Christians coming from a long lineage of, reading the Bible. How do they get to a point that is polar opposite of what you just described? Because that's something that, for me, I've talked about on the show. That's one of the big battering rams against my faith, has been seeing the people that know the Bible the best, the religious people in society, seem to be the worst people, and I don't like to generalize, and I would never say all Christians or all atheists or all any group, because there's bad people in every group, good people in every group. But when I look at my show, the people that have fallen the hardest tend to be the people who have the biggest platforms, the most connections, the most power, the most knowledge, or they're looked to as the strongest teachers. How are they going to scripture, reading the story of Jesus and coming away being, abusive or manipulative or just mean at the best? How does that happen?
Well, I think that people love power, right? It's like I told it's like I told a group of students one time. I jokingly said this, of course. I said that communism looks great on paper. The problem is when somebody greedy gets involved. And then I said, but there's always someone greedy, right? Like there's never not a greedy person. So I think the truth is the same. Like as people get a reputation and as they get power, they begin to manipulate those things. I mean, I think we heard a really great detailed story of that through Christianity Today's telling of, the rise and fall of Mars Hill, right? Like I think at the beginning, for all his warts and imperfections, I think Mark Driscoll legitimately wanted to reach Seattle in a grunge punk rock kind of way, right? Like he was a little bit off the rails, but he legitimately wanted to raise up a generation of new men in that city. He wanted to raise, families up in that city. Like, I think that's where the mission started. The problem is that when people start getting notoriety, they start getting fame, they start getting power, they start getting influence, all of those things. Then their influence, then their worldview is influenced by their power instead of their power being influenced by their worldview. So they get it twisted, and then it's a cherry picking thing, right? Like I'm going to take this passage out and I'm going to hold it up in your face, but I'm not going to put it in biblical context. I'm not going to put it in literary context. I'm not going to put it in historical context. I'm just going to grab this one out and hold it because this makes me feel like I have power. And so I honestly think that that's a lot of where it comes from, is that at the end of the day, it is them letting their worldview be influenced by their power instead of the other way around.
How do we, so you bring up Driscoll, obviously, and he's a great example. I mean, he's being talked about a lot right now. How do we prevent this from happening? Because you see a lot of times, it all looks the same. I mean, I was just watching The Eyes of Tammy Faye, just recently. You see a Jerry Falwell, the political motivations behind a lot of that stuff. Or you read like a Jesus and John Wayne, you see this kind of play out, this political move for additional power, additional strength, and with people who starting out seem to have good intentions. At some point in the beginning there was good intentions that got perverted. How does the church identify this before it becomes another fall of Mars Hill? Like, how do you identify these problems? Because again, like I said, like it's hard to determine in the beginning what's blessing, what we identify as like a blessing on somebody versus, oh, they're manipulative and they're really good at bringing power to themselves.
Yeah, I think good, open, honest, transparent conversations. I was just preaching yesterday out of John chapter 3. Toward the end of the chapter, Jesus is telling Nicodemus, he says, you people want to hide in the darkness because their deeds are evil. So they want to stay there. They don't want to be seen.
Huh? That's why my youth pastor said people like going to movie theaters.
Right. Oh Lord. Yeah.
You love darkness rather than light.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. That's pretty funny. But I think that what has to happen is we have to expose those things, but then we also have to normalize pastors, religious leaders, Christian influencers, Christian people in general, being open and transparent and saying, here's some areas where I failed. Here's some areas where I haven't looked like Jesus. I haven't sounded like Jesus, whether it be in my past, whether it be 5 minutes ago, whatever the case is. We have to normalize a culture of being able to, kind of telling ourselves, right. And to be, and to make it a thing that's open and transparent. I know what a lot of pastors get caught in is, I think of a pastor that I knew here in Oklahoma who, before he had even gotten into ministry, struggled with a porn addiction. Okay. And then he was having a conversation with, this was years on down the line. Marriage was great. Kids were wonderful. Ministry was going well. He had kicked that addiction. Him and his wife had a check and balance system put in place, right? Like a covenant eyes or something like that, all of those good things. He's sitting down at dinner with a with a deacon at the church at the time, and he shares that with this guy just in private conversation. Just, hey man, he said it came up that, another church member or whatever had shared it with this deacon, and the deacon was seeking the pastor's, wisdom on it. And the pastor goes, man, I struggled with that too. I totally get where this guy's coming from. Here's the steps that I took to walk out of that. Right. So if the church is working well, that's perfect, because now we've gained tribal knowledge of how to grow better together, right? Like now you don't have to make the mistake because I made it for us, right? Like it sucked and I wish I had never done it, but now we can grow together. We can normalize that. But the problem is that that guy walked out of there, called a private deacons meeting, and that dude was out on the street in a week. They fired him because he had a porn addiction 10 years before he ever took the pulpit at that church. So, and that's the culture we've created in the American church. It's cannibalism. It's who can live the best Instagram life, who can show up on Sunday morning and their family's all dressed to the nines and they look great and they're so excited to be there. And mama sits quietly and holds the baby while dad amens, about every third sentence. It's a beautiful structure, oh, pastor, we're so blessed. We're doing so good. I'm going to have the house with the picket fence, 2 dogs, 3 kids, whatever the averages are today, 2 1/4 kids. I don't know, whatever. And, I'm going to live the American dream, America first. Like this feels so good. So we've normalized faking it. We've normalized two-faced personalities when we should have been normalizing transparency and just talking about that people sometimes, no, not sometimes, all the time, people show up with baggage and humanity is just kind of, it's gross at times and it stinks at times. And so if we ever want to see the church come out of where they are, then what's got to happen is people have to start saying, here's my baggage, here's my stuff. I'm willing to bring it into the light, and I'm wanting to repent for it. Not only repent for it, but I'm also willing to say, hey, let's be better together. Yeah. And I think the sooner that happens, we're going to see less abuse in the church, because people just aren't going to stand for it at that point. Right. If everything's out in the light, people just aren't going to cover up for it when it does happen, and people aren't going to allow it. Right. Like it's just, everybody community wide would be fighting against it. But right now, because everybody's trying to keep each other's secrets and keep it on the down low, and everybody's trying to look their best and sound their best and be their best, especially these people at the top. Yeah. They don't want to be brought down. So they're keeping a bunch of secrets. They got all the skeletons shoved in the closet, nice and neat behind some boxes, no problem. Right. And if it ever comes out, then the whole empire starts to topple. So it's, that's how you create a culture of abuse. That's how you create a culture of issues. And until we normalize dragging our skeletons out of the closet and saying, here's all my crap and here's all your crap. And, we're going to walk through this and be better for it. And we're not going to allow it inside this community again until that happens. We're just going to continue to reap the same cycle.
You hit something huge there, which is, the church tends to eat people alive who are, either had a past situation, like you mentioned, like a porn addiction 10 years before getting the pulpit, or somebody who, porn's a great example. Like you look at, I look at the guilt, in high school, of I looked at something, you just sit there crying every Sunday for the next year, be like, why am I interested in girls? Why is this, this? And then you start finding out, like, I would be in less trouble and have less guilt if I was molesting a teenage girl as a youth pastor. Like there was this overabundance of grace on, people that should have gone through a legal process, should have been, there was this overflowing amount of grace for people in serious issues. But then it was almost like a diversion from that stuff was like, let's go after people for going to movie theaters, a guy looking at porn, or someone dancing or drinking or whatever that other thing was that, maybe wasn't positive within that context, or not positive at all, depending on what of those things we're talking about. But it was this thing of, let's focus and tear apart people over little things while also letting big things slide. And that's a really confusing thing to see. I still am confused by it.
It is confusing, but think about it like this. That's a great point, by the way. But think about this. The youth pastor who is preying on teenage girls is the same guy that 5 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever, was sitting there scared to death to tell anybody that he had stumbled across some boobs online, right? And didn't know how to talk about it. And so he internalized it, because both of those guys are products of purity culture inside of that fundamentalism. And so then what happens is instead of the church coming alongside this kid who's not afraid to say, look, I have this thing going on in my life. I don't know what to do. Like when he's 15, right? Like I feel like this wasn't right. Can we talk about it? And somebody taking him under the wing and having an honest conversation about life and about sex and relationships, right? Instead of that, now you're asking a 15-year-old kid to manage sexual emotion, right? And never have a real conversation about it because he's scared to death. Well, then all of a sudden now you just have an immature adult. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't by any stretch of the imagination ever justify any kind of abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. It doesn't justify any of that. But the reason that so many of these guys end up in that is because they have been a product of a system that set them up to fail. Yeah. Right. It set them up to be abusers. And that's the reason I say so often when we talk about the IFB, when we talk about the fundamentalist church, they're cults, and they are abuse factories. And the reason that they're abuse factories is because they don't handle anything well and nobody's having real conversations. They're worried about is little Susie's dress long enough? Is her hair done right? Right. They're worried about all of these things. They're worried about, did you wear your tie? Are you tying that right? And so on and so forth. All that, don't go to the movies, right? All of this stuff. Don't listen to that, satanic, Christian rock music. How dare you listen to DC Talk or Skillet, and so out of that comes this just immature, uneducated crop of people who have no real context of deeper understandings of life, sex, relationships, marriages, friendships, family, all of those deep, intricate things that the church should be talking about and should normalize talking about, we're missing on. And so then what happens is you then create a predator because this guy comes out, has never been held accountable, has never known how to handle these emotions and these feelings and these urges, right? And then ends up, preying on some, vulnerable kid who doesn't know any better. And then this is how we end up with a cyclical abuse, a cycle of abuse. And so it's just disgusting. And I could go on that one for a long time, but it all stems from the horrible purity culture that is rampant inside of those churches and cultures.
Yeah, well, you're teaching this kind of permanent adolescence to men. That's when I named the podcast. It's one of the things that preacher boys is a term obviously I borrowed from that world. That was a term used lovingly for young college age men that were going into ministry. But for me, there was a boys club of pastors that covered things up. So it was an interesting play on words there. But also I think boys is a very telling word.
Astute word.
It's and you have these youth pastors getting thrown in who again have this big closet of weird secrets they were taught. It's a mess. It's a mess the way that men are trained, the way that, especially the fact that teenagers, in a youth group are used as a training ground for somebody in ministry when that's not a place you want to be testing out someone's leadership ability. That's not a place you want to see hey, are they going to be good in ministry? You're potentially damaged, even if there's no sexual abuse, just having someone leading a group of people who is not figured anything out for themselves at all
Yes.
is a dangerous place to be. I want to talk, we talked a little bit about like exposing the really small stuff, but leaving the big stuff covered up. One of the things that stood out to me with your TikTok and with your social presence is that, you pull a lot of skeletons out of the closet and talk a lot about, issues within churches. And one of the things I want to get your perspective on as a pastor is, one of the biggest reasons I see well-intentioned people cover up abuses is PR. We don't want to make the name of Jesus look bad. How many times I've heard it's going to make Jesus look bad. It's going to make the church look bad. It's going to make Christianity look bad. What's your take on that as a pastor, and why are you not scared to point to some of the negative things, to point to a Bill Reeves, on a TikTok, or to point to, abusive leadership within churches, because the collective seems to be that's going to turn people away from church.
I would hope, and I've seen it as so I pastor a church in person here in Oklahoma City area, but I also lead a gathering online, and all of those people are folks who are not inside of a physical church right now, right, or a traditional church right now. They've either, like, for example, one lady on our leadership team, this is the first church she's ever attended. Had never had a spiritual interest at all until she ran across this stuff on TikTok. Just thought Christians were horrible, evil, disgusting, because of all the reasons that we've talked about, right? And then she comes across, some of the content that, I've created and other folks kind of in that vein have created. And she was like, oh, wow, like there's accountability happening. Now I'm interested. And so now she's a believer and someone who is extremely proactive in an online church, having been someone who never went to church. And then we also have folks who, come from Catholicism or a fundamentalist background who then left the church running because of the things that we've talked about, right? They've been disenfranchised, they've been hurt. And, but the one thing that brings a community together like that, and the reason that I would say that it's not going to push people away from the church, that I would hope that it would push people to Jesus, is because they're starting to see accountability for all the things that they know. You say you follow this Jesus guy, and he says he's about love. He says he's about grace. He says he's about forgiveness and honesty and all of that, right? Justice and mercy. But you're not doing any of those. And so what they're seeing is what I would hope that they're seeing is through that ministry is accountability starting to happen in the church, and a challenge for the church, the capital C church, the people of Jesus followers, that we would be running to him and looking more like him regularly. Now, I don't always accomplish that goal. None of us do. But my goal each day is that when I lay my head on the pillow, did I look more like Jesus today? Did I sound more like Jesus today? Did I act more like Jesus today? Did I treat my neighbors more like Jesus today? And so I think it's good. I think it's good to have accountability inside the church. And, and I think Jesus set that precedent, right? He called out the religious establishment. It was corrupted. It was broken. And, he looked at the Pharisees and the Sadducees at the time and the scribes. And I mean, like we said earlier, we kind of talked about it earlier, he had some of his harshest criticism for them. And so, I feel like fighting, with those who have been disenfranchised and marginalized by the church, is important. I feel like pushing back against the establishment when it doesn't look like Jesus, when it doesn't sound like Jesus, when it doesn't act like Jesus, is important. And so what I would hope is that people aren't seeing me just, exposing the dirty details of the church with no end in mind. What I want to do is bring accountability, and so that these things stop happening. And so, that would be my prayer. And I hope that, I hope that God would would use that. And I hope that I'm, being actively used by his hands. I don't want to be, I don't want to be bringing the accountability. I want Jesus to bring the accountability.
Sure. Yeah. Like I said, I'm encouraged when I see that. That's one of the reasons that I've followed and connected. And one of the, I've said, like, one of the biggest reasons I stepped away from Christianity in the last year was watching. It was watching the response of pastors, and the pushback against any form of accountability, any form of approaching this topic. And what's scary to me is, I grew up hearing, and I'm sure you did too, it's Hollywood this, and what about the world, and it's certainly there. Like, there's certainly abuses and things, but I sat down with someone just a few days ago, interviewing them for my film podcast. I was interviewing an actress, and we're talking about Harvey Weinstein. She was talking about all of the ways that led to change within the industry, a lot of initiatives that she was a part of, making sure there were ways to report, making sure there was all this transparency, making sure there were coordinators that could help production assistant report somebody high up, and all the different resources and apps and things that were being created. And I was sitting there going, like, it's crazy to me that Hollywood is is handling this so seriously, that Me Too came to Hollywood 2 years before it hit the Church Too waves. And I just sit there and go, like, it seems like the church should be leading the charge in this area. But again,
sure,
it's sad to me when someone does the bare minimum. It's like, well, thank you. Thank you so much for doing the bare minimum, at least saying it's bad. Like, you'll publicly say, oh, there's abuse in churches and it's bad. It's hard. It's like pulling teeth to get that.
Yeah. And that's ultimately, I think, the biggest problem is that the church in America has found itself time and time again on the wrong side of history. They have bastardized the gospel and weaponized the gospel to justify slavery, segregation, misogyny, homophobia, bigotry. Just the laundry list, right? And then here we are, we've got pastors covering up for other pastors, trying to keep their buddies safe, in abusive, disgusting situations, when we should be the first ones dragging, like we talked about earlier, we should be the first ones dragging everything out into the light and saying, here it all is, here's the baggage, here's the junk, here's all the imperfections and the disgusting stuff, but we are cleaning this up. And it is really telling to me that, I think about, like I told you earlier, I come from the SBC. Well, just this fall, the SBC fought back and forth about whether or not their executive committee was going to waive their attorney-client privilege to be discussing abuses inside the SBC.
Not to cut you off, but do you think that there is, I question this all the time with large institutions, with mega churches, with the Southern Baptist Convention, do you think it's purely a fact that they're over leveraged financially and are doing these multi-billion-dollar projects, multi-million-dollar projects around the world, that, like, they have to act as a corporation? They have to be thinking, well, what's a lawyer going to, like, to me, it seems like there's just a fear, like, oh, the corporation's going to come crumbling down. Like, when you've got $1 million mortgage, or
that might be, but it's not a Fortune 500 company. It's a church. So,
well, I agree.
You know what I'm saying? No,
practically.
Right. Yeah. So I guess at the end of the day, here's the deal. Like, is it more about saving your rear end and keeping everybody's jobs and covering up the things that, so you don't get sued, or you don't get, you don't take a big hit in the pocketbook? Or is it about morality? Mm-hmm. Like, and people's lives? Like, we are talking about abuse victims. We're talking about people's lives who will never be the same because they have been abused by leaders inside the church. I don't care what it costs. It costs what it costs. And if that means, I said after that on my podcast, I host a podcast with two other folks and from TikTok. and they asked me about it because they knew I came from an SBC background. And I have finally come to the point with them where I'm like, gasoline, not water. It's all on fire, but let's just pour gasoline on it. Because here's the thing. I don't care if it burns to the ground, if that means that the abuse stops happening. So, I don't care about, and I think they are thinking of it like exactly what you're saying, right? Yeah. Which you wouldn't advocate for, or neither would I, but they are probably thinking, man, we're running this multi-million-dollar corporation, and we got to save our butts because, there's a lot on the line here. I don't care what's on the line. Yeah. Let it burn.
I wish I'd see more radical risk like that. The funny thing is, like, if you are looking at it from a business perspective, this is where I go back and forth. I mean, I look at the church that I grew up in, that helped spark me thinking about this stuff in the first place, because there was a cover up that happened firsthand within the church I was in. Someone was relocated to our church. My dad's still on staff there, which makes for awkward holiday conversations because I do this podcast.
Thanksgiving's a little weird.
And, a little bit weird, but it's like, I look at that and, right now, the administrator of the school that I grew up in is married to the pedophile that was relocated to our church. And so I've had conversations with people that work there that I still feel like I have any kind of, and I'm just like, from a purely non-moral perspective, like from purely just business, someone comes to enroll their kid in the school. They Google the principal's name. The first 3 hits on Google are of a youth pastor molesting a teenage girl in his youth group. From just a PR level, you're not helping yourself.
It's a bad look.
But also on the flip side of that, like I mentioned, for me, like I distance myself from the church at large, and I don't know. I mean, who knows where I would be right now, but I feel like if there were more people, if there were more Jeremys in the world, or if there were more people who are calling this stuff out, even if it's dirty, even if there's stuff where it's like, man, I can't believe this happened in a church. Like, I feel like I may have still in the beginning of 2020 been like, let's try to find a church in this new area, instead of going like, I need a break from this because it's too much. And it's more spiritually damaging to be in a church than to be out of it. But it's not, it just hasn't been the case. And I don't understand. And again, like I've said on the show, I'm never turned off by a church, even now, like even right now, I don't feel any bitterness toward churches or toward Christians. I feel like there's, maybe toward institutionalized groups like the Southern Baptist Convention, I've got some feelings about, the way it's being run and things like that. Yeah. But it's one of those things where when you have 250 people in an IFB church, the odds of something happening over a 20-year period is pretty high. There's going to be pedophiles. There's going to be there's going to be a rapist. There's going to be things that happen. You're not guilty because that happens in your church. That's just a result of people gathering. That happens at a business with employees. But what do you do when it happens? That's what people are judging by. And I think churches are severely underrating like what it can do to just say like, oh, that happened. Here's how we're going to handle it.
And the response has been piss poor, right? At best.
That's the soundbite to start the episode.
I mean, it's just been asinine. And I just don't understand why you wouldn't be doing everything you could possibly do to get ahead of the curve and say, no, we are going over the top with the boundaries that we are putting in place. Like we are locking it down. Because it's like, I mean, like how many times did you hear growing up, it sounds like we grew up in very similar spaces, you have to abstain from the appearance of any evil,
just the
appearance of evil. Right. And so, but then when it comes to that point, they're like, well, I don't know. Well, we'll just, we'll fix it next time or whatever. And I get so tired of hearing these folks justify it by saying, well, it's not all churches, or, it's not, or my church is not that way, or, this was one circumstance, like our church as a whole is not this way. And I'm like, and I had somebody ask me, well, when is it like going to be enough? Yeah. And I said, it's always going to take one more, because the problem is that so many people are so indoctrinated and so engulfed that they're never going to wake up out of it until it's them or their kid. That's when it's going to change.
And
for
even then, some don't snap out of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a great point. That's a great point too.
This is what's difficult for me. You know, I had somebody, you know, when I talked about, you know, leaving the church, and, you know, it just, for me, it became too much of a, you know, it was too much of a cognitive dissonance between what I was seeing and what I was supposed to be feeling about the religion, about you know, all of this, where I was like, I couldn't justify what I was in, you know? And so for me, but one of the things that was really frustrating to me is there was a pastor who, you know, I had been on their podcast and talked about it, you know, but when I announced that, you know, his first thing was, you focused on the darkness so much that it made you ignore all the good things. And, you know, when I think about that, I think about the trajectory of my life. I've been doing Preacher Boys for 2 years. I wasn't focusing on the darkness when, as a 16-year-old, I saw a predator get shuffled to our church. I wasn't focused on the darkness when I went into a missions organization where the founder was paying himself 13 grand and saying, we don't have enough money to pay these pastors or to do this, or to pay you more than $500 a month. I wasn't following that when I was fired from that missions organization by the next guy who, you know, I didn't like that we were praying in a circle around the American flag when Trump was running for office. You know, I wasn't chasing the darkness when I saw, you know, one and done counseling session to get a guy back into ministry after, you know, being incredibly abusive. For me, I was never focused on it. It seemed like the darkness was kind of focused and following me around. You know, I went to different denominations, went to different churches, jumped out of that. Oh, I'll follow, I'll try to watch stuff from an Apologia, or I'll try to watch stuff from a John MacArthur who's saying horrific, you know, it's like you jump from all these circles to Independent Baptist. So the Southern Baptist is better. Go to that, go to the Reformed Baptist. It's you know, oh, Mark Driscoll, perfect. You know, I'll recover with some Driscoll. It's like, he's safe. But it's time and time again, it's like, I wasn't focused on, like, it was born out of just like, it was a barrage of this over and over again. And
because eventually it becomes the rule, not the exception, right?
It's an exception to see someone, like I said, like you're not doing something revolutionary, you know what I mean? Like the fact that I'm taken aback by, like, hey, there's this guy on TikTok who's like saying that bad things shouldn't happen in the church, you know, like that you stand out as much as you do. And it is sad. Like, I joke about it, but the reason you've got however many followers you have now, thousands and thousands of people tuning in, is because that is the exception. To have a baseline level of morality as a pastor or in a church is like, whoa, like,
it's like a circus, right? Like nobody's seen the elephant balance on the ball before. This is nuts.
Right.
And that is, I think ultimately at the end of the day, I think that is one of the saddest things. I told somebody I was really struggling, you know, cause it comes with ups and downs. There's no doubt about it. And I was just really struggling. I just gotten like I've gotten several, pretty serious death threats or, whatever, because people are nuts. But I had just gotten one of those, and, there's just a lot of stuff swirling, and Fox News had picked up a story that I had done, about, Hagee's church chanting, "Let's go Brandon," in their service or in their, in their church. And then, Locke's church was doing it in service, and so I was calling all that bull crap out. And then, then all the, and it's not even people who are like traditional Republicans, it's the extremist Trumpists. It's them that are just nuts. And so I'm getting like all this kickback, and I'm really struggling. And I remember I looked at my wife one night and I said, the things I'm saying should be boring.
Yeah.
It should just be boring. Like people, it should just be taken for granted that we're going to be kind to each other. It should just be taken for granted that Jesus is enough for your pulpit. Like, you don't need the politics and the whatever else. Like it should be, it should be boring for me to say, we should not be, abusing women inside the church, like this misogyny, this abuse, sexual, emotional, physical, mental abuse that's happening inside of the church, spiritual abuse, like these things shouldn't be happening. That should be boring as hell. Like it should just be really, really boring, but it's not, because again, all the things that you're describing is that, yeah, we were chasing after the light. We wanted to see Jesus, and we ran from place to place to place and thing to thing. And at the end of the day, we looked up and we went, this is just a bunch of bullshit. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know if your podcast is.
It's fine. Yeah, you're good.
Or not, but it's just a bunch of bull crap, and it's, so eventually, like, you have to look up and you go, I tried to find all the good stuff, and it's just not here. And so the exception is the things that, really at the end of the day should be boring.
Right. Yeah, man. Like I said, I mean, to me, it's encouraging to see people, because again, like my goal is not, it has not been I want to see every church shut down or, and I think there are people in the space of what I do that feel that way, and to some level, I can understand that, I can understand, like, oh, there's so much badness, there's so much, but for me, I think there's really a handful of healthy examples of what a church can look like and what a community can look like. And I know enough of those people to go, I don't think it's tear it all down or, be done with it. I think if people are going to choose to attend a church, I think there's a responsibility to keep those people safe. I think that, I was talking with a friend of mine who is going through something with their church right now, and, was talking to me about, the lawyer's saying to do this and that. And I told them, I said, I have skin in this game, like I said, I do this myself. I said, do what's right, not necessarily what's, what your lawyers advise you to do or what's safest to do. And I told them, I said, I probably will get sued at some point doing this show, knock on wood. I probably will at some point get sued for saying something or going after the wrong big name or whoever. Yeah. But there's just a point. And I think what's funny is that so much of this is informed from teachings I heard growing up being a Christian soldier, like go out, fight the fight that no one else wants to do. But then when you actually do it, there's this like pushback of like, well, keep quiet and don't talk. It's so weird. But like all that to say, I mean, I really hope we'll see some more boring people like you pop up. I'm really hoping we'll see some more people just do baseline human decency. Yeah, is so needed. And this is what I think I want to just nail home is like, for someone like me who's looking at it goes like, and finally got to the point I was like, I'm fed up with this. I want out of this. Like, that's what I was looking for. I was not looking for this crazy, political shift. I wasn't looking for it to go, in this direction, or especially, I hate when people say, oh, you leave the church because of the music or whatever, like, whatever. It wasn't over music or all this stuff. It's like, I just want baseline human decency, like you see outside of the church, like you see with non-believers every single day. Yeah. It's like, I don't want to be in this toxic country club of people that keep covering it, this toxic preacher boys club that just protects itself. And so, I mean, that's, like I said, that's why I wanted to connect with you. I think just people hearing that perspective is refreshing. I know there's a lot of people in my audience that probably don't know who you are. And I want them to hear a perspective that's not just, a Bill Reeves. It's not just a Jeff Durbin or, the people that go out and say really aggressive and offensive things, purposelessly. I think there's a place for being aggressive. I don't think it's in the way that most pastors are.
Yeah, I agree, man. Well, I appreciate you letting me come on for sure. Yeah. And I'm super grateful for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people connect with you if they want to send you a death threat? What's the best?
The best. The best place to send me a death threat is probably on Instagram. Just at Pastor from OK, at Pastor from OK. I'm most active on TikTok. just because that's where, a lot of the following is and stuff like that. I have Instagram and Twitter as well. I'm on there occasionally, but not quite as much. And then, if you want to learn more, get connected, just pastorfromok.com. And you can hang out there, and, I've got a podcast and some other things. And, I don't know. I don't know when this episode is going to release. Do you have any idea on that?
In the next 2 weeks or so.
Gotcha. So,
depending on what you're going to say, I can move it to match up.
No, you're good. I was just going to say, on the, and now I got to look at the calendar. See, I'm bringing things up. I don't even know what I'm talking about. Got a single coming out on Spotify and iTunes on the 26th.
Okay.
And so I did like a little spoof silly song on TikTok with my guitar, and people loved it. They wanted a full version, and so we made a full version so people can check that out too. So just all sorts of fun stuff going on.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have links to all that in the show notes, and I really appreciate it. Hope we stay connected. I'm so bad at connecting with people, but I like building some new online friends, which is so funny. So much of this, if you'd said it 10 years ago, you'd be like, stay off all these chat rooms with random strangers. But it's been awesome connecting with you, and hope we can stay in touch.
Same, man. Just continue keeping up the good fight. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and you got a friend in me for sure.
Yeah, got to keep it up. I've gotten one death threat, so I got to get.
Good. No,
I got to work on getting a few more.
You got your feet wet. That's cool.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah, it's funny, man.
I think I need to have you on my podcast. We need to talk about that. The death threat life is so fun. No, that's awesome. Yeah, just keep it up. That's how you know you're doing the right thing.
Right. Well, thanks so much. And everybody listening, be sure to check out the show notes. Go check out the single for sure. We'll make sure this drops right around the time you can grab it, and be sure to follow over on TikTok. Until next time, peace out.